Right, so when we last checked on the Eternal City, it had just been slapped across the chops by Marius and Sulla's heavy-handed dictatorships, and was left with the Senate rubbing its cheeks pretty hard. It's time for the Fall of the Republic, Part 2. Let's talk triumvirates. First, let's introduce one of Sulla's most able commanders, Pompeius Gnaeus Magnus, but let's call him Pompey. After Sulla's death, Pompey gained acclaim here and there, with victories in Africa and Sicily, but it wasn't until he pulled off a very cheeky theft of credit that Rome stood up and took notice. The thing is, the Romans hadn't been treating their slaves, and more specifically their gladiators, particularly well. In 73 BC, a gladiator supposedly named Spartacus led a revolt against Rome. He wins multiple victories and scares the Romans quite a bit, but is eventually collared by local bajillionaire Marcus Licinius Crassus. More on him later, but on Pompey's journey back to Rome, he spots the remnants of Spartacus's army, captures a few thousand of them, and returns home a hero after taking credit for the victory. Clever boy. Pompey, through a sequence of military victories and pandering to the public, gains enormous popularity among the Senate and begins to be seen as a sort of defender of the Republic. Here's where things get really interesting, because it's where we introduce everyone's favourite model for betrayal, Julius Caesar. Caesar had been gaining renown for a number of years, and by 59 BC he had become consul. Now Caesar had not only flirted with the idea of a political alliance with Pompey, but he also owed a substantial sum to the aforementioned filthy rich Crassus. So the three agreed to consolidate their considerable influence and created the first triumvirate. After Caesar was awarded the governance of both Cisalpine and Transalpine Gaul in 55 BC, Crassus and Pompey both become consul, with the former taking Syria and the latter taking Spain. Crassus meets his end at the hands of the Parthians in 55 BC, after attempting a highly ill-advised eastern invasion. This resulted in shared power in Rome between Caesar and Pompey, however the political situation is certainly not stable. Now, any disagreement between the two would be seen as a dangerous rivalry. Caesar settles the conquest of Gaul in 50 BC and gains enormous popularity with both the patricians, the upper class, and the plebeians, everyone else, and upsets the balance of power in Rome, resulting in the end of the first triumvirate. With Caesar's popularity at an all-time high, the fearful Pompey-led Senate demanded that he disband his army, or else be declared an enemy of the state. It was at this point that Caesar famously crossed the Rubicon, beginning the First Civil War. After Caesar's army chases Pompey's around the Mediterranean for a couple of months, the latter is finally killed by the child pharaoh of Egypt, and brother, husband and co-monarch to Cleopatra, who also happens to be at war with her. Thus the civil war was ended and Caesar took power as dictator, placing Mark Antony as his second-in-command, and immediately aids Cleopatra in securing the throne of Egypt. Caesar sets about on a policy of reducing the power of the Senate, and whilst he never takes the title of king, his constant rewriting of legislature and grooming of his heir, Octavian, indicates his reign was kingly in everything but name. But Caesar's boat-rocking didn't go without splashing a few too many high-ranking senators, who, in 44 BC, after fears that he intended to reinstall a monarchy in Rome, plotted and executed the successful assassination of Julius Caesar in an event known as the Ides of March. With Caesar dead, Rome was plunged into another period of instability, ending with three men: Mark Antony, Caesar's second-in-command, Marcus Aemilius Lepidus, the Republic's religious leader, the Pontifex Maximus, and Caesar's adopted heir, Octavian, forming the second triumvirate and dividing the Republic into three spheres of influence. Internal jealousies resulted in Octavian and Antony conspiring against each other, with the former exposing the latter's will, which stated that Antony's body was to be moved to Egypt upon his death. With the public in an uproar, the Senate declared war on Cleopatra, Antony's lover, in 32 BC. The war is quickly resolved, with Octavian finally defeating Antony and Cleopatra at the Battle of Actium, after which the lovers commit suicide. With Antony dead, and Lepidus having been marginalised politically a few years prior, Octavian now stood alone as the master of Rome. In 27 BC he declares himself emperor, taking the name Augustus, and ending 5 centuries of republic. So here's a summary of the situation in 27 BC. Rome is now officially an empire, the last classical power, Egypt, has fallen, and so begins Rome's time as undisputed master of Europe. Next time we continue with crazy emperors, gladiators, and more barbarians.